welcome to the REMOJO podcast. I'm Jack Jenkins, the founder and CEO of REMOJO, the world's only complete app-based program helping conscious adults quit porn. We're on a mission to help as many people as possible wake up, quit porn, and get a lust for life. And you can join the movement at remojo.app. That's remojo.app. I'm here today with our guest Venka de Rooij. And Venka is an accredited psychotherapist specialising in trauma-specific therapy for individuals who want to permanently heal and move forward from trauma using gentle, caring, and highly effective neuroscience techniques. She has experience working with porn and sex addicts through her practice and brings a range of therapeutic techniques to bear on issues which we'll discuss today. You can find out more and work with her at greymatterstherapy.com. Venka, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jack.
So why don't we start with just high-level view of how would you summarize your experience with sex or porn addicts in your practice?
I mainly deal with trauma, but a lot addictions are just behaviors to run away from something or to find relief. So people may not recognize it as having suffered for trauma, but trauma is what drives the addiction, or the compulsion drives them to relieve the anxiety.
And so you are how sort of often are you running into this issue?
More and more, but the people who originally contact me, sometimes they only disclose it after the third session. So they contact me to treat one thing, but then after the third or the fourth session, they actually say, by the way, I have this little issue. And
what's like the transition? What are they transitioning from, right? So they come in with A.
Yeah.
What is A typically?
It can be self-esteem, self-worth. It can be any anxiety. That is a big one. And then later, when you've earned the trust, they say, by the way, you know when I said there's anxiety? Well, I do have anxiety, but I do this other thing to relieve the anxiety. And I'm like, okay, I wish you had told me that at the start, because it would have been really beneficial to actually formulate come up with a treatment plan.
So you're finding that basically people are using porn as a coping mechanism for severe anxiety
or trauma. Or
trauma.
Yeah.
And so actually, so trauma is something that within the app or within our course, we don't really touch upon that because we are first and foremost a habit change program. So we don't talk so much about trauma because it's really the realm of qualified therapists like yourself. So, but I do think that it has quite a role in the problem, especially for those of people who are familiar with us using our app that have a more serious porn addiction, right? And so, but it's not something that everyday people really understand or know about, I feel. So how would you sort of define trauma? What is trauma?
Trauma is any event that actually makes you feel helpless or you feel hopeless. You are not in control. Now, we have small t trauma and big T trauma. So small t trauma can be like the time you got, I don't know, somebody called you names, but it affected you, or you felt overwhelmed with the situation because you didn't have the tools to deal with that. Now, big T trauma can be an accident, it can be being the victim of a crime, or anything that is more specifically thought as big trauma. But you also have series of small trauma that can actually be worse as one big event of big T trauma.
Yeah.
And it also depends when it actually happened. Did you have a support network you could fall onto, etc.? And that is actually really important.
And so if you can cast your mind back to, let's say, like the last a few clients that had either sex or porn addiction, what are the traumas that typically go along with that or that might go along with that?
Sometimes it's losing a parent. Sometimes it's a parent that's not emotionally available, or that was not physically and emotionally available. It was a feeling of feeling unloved or not valued, or maybe you didn't have a voice, you were not seen or not heard.
Okay. And that, how do you feel like, what's the role of that in creating the addiction? You know, what's the kind of typical
I can give you an
story?
example, but I have to change some specifics for to maintain.
Yeah.
So I had one client who had a fetish for long opera sleeves,
Okay.
and it caused huge issues in his relationships because he didn't want to have sex without the wife wearing the long opera sleeves. And she thought it was fun for a while, but after that, and we traced it back, and it was because the only time he actually got affection from his mother was when she went to the opera wearing the opera sleeves, and she would kiss him goodnight, and she would stroke his forehead wearing the sleeves, the gloves. So that was a funny one.
Okay. What else?
Sometimes it's because they find like a magazine of their dad, and it just becomes something exciting. But then when people are going through a difficult period in their life, they're feeling depressed or anxious or really stressed, then that becomes their coping mechanism. And then your brain starts to think, I need this to alleviate my stress, depression, anxiety, etc. So in a way, you're creating a reward system to relieve something, which then becomes a coping mechanism. And at some point, the coping mechanism will actually overtake the reward that you get, if that makes sense.
So you said the coping mechanism will sort of...
So it's a cost-benefit analysis. The coping mechanism works really well, but the coping mechanism itself becomes a problem.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And so, like, when you're thinking about trauma, it sounds like you would set the bar fairly low, maybe, right? Because I imagine people have differing opinions about how you define trauma, right? Is that the case where you might?
Yes.
Yeah.
But small t traumas, everybody has got small t traumas, but it's very much like how overwhelming it is depends on what environment you are in. So, for example, if you hurt yourself as a child, I don't know, you broke your leg, but your parent or guardian or caretaker took you to the hospital, it would be scary and it wouldn't be a nice memory, but it doesn't have to be a trauma. Now, if you broke your leg and you said my leg hurt, but it's not recognized it's broken and you are in pain for a couple of days, that could actually turn into a trauma because you felt helpless and not heard and not seen.
So you're saying that basically, if we're trying to, let's say the people watching this, or just anyone is trying to identify potential traumas in their life, you think that we could sort of cast our own minds back and try and find these episodes where we felt...
You don't necessarily know about it. It's in your subconscious. So you may get triggered by something, but it's not what actually happens at that moment that you get triggered. What's triggering you is just a reminder of something earlier that is triggering you. But you're not actually consciously aware of that the trigger is of an event in the past. So there's actually a process. So you've got the initial sensitizing event, which is like a seed. Then you have subsequent sensitizing events that are like fertilizer. And then you have a symptom producing event where actually something grows and you can actually see it. So at the time that you have a symptom producing event where you get triggered, you may think that is the issue. But when you trace it back in time and I always do a float back, where is this an earlier memory, what do you feel in your body, etc., then you can go back to past events that actually caused the whole situation or the issue or the problem.
So what is this float back sort of process?
Oh, so float back is, it's quite simple. I can give you an example.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, so what image or what emotions do you feel? Where do you feel it in your body? Now close your eyes, float back, drift back in time. Don't censorship, don't judge. Go back in time, trace it back, trace it back, trace it back. And people just float back to an earlier event automatically.
And is this something that can be is this something you can do on your own, or do you feel?
You can do it on your own, but there's nothing to help you contain it or to understand it. That is the problem. So I wouldn't actually, there's nobody to guide you, but I also wouldn't really recommend it, doing that. I actually would not recommend doing that.
Okay. Because you'll just be left, you'll have some memories, but you won't know how to...
Yeah, you won't know, how to process it, and you also may not know what to... how to understand the situation or get a different perspective, but it also may really trigger you. So that is the safety aspect of what I would be concerned about.
Yeah. So what do you think, how would you say the guys kind of should go about evaluating, like, either the need to do this kind of exploration, and the approach as well, right? So I mean, I'm curious, just like, you go through life and it's difficult to say whether something is big T trauma to small t or just everyday life, right? And you got to you kind of need to sort things into these kind of categories.
Yeah, I wouldn't say categories. Like, some people, they can cope with big events and other people can't cope as well. And there is no right or wrong about that. Some people are genetically more predisposed to be deeply affected by it.
Okay.
Other people are not. Then you also have like intergenerational trauma, which is basically trauma from your family, from your parents, your grandparents, which can be genetically or learned trauma. Vicarious trauma, that's actually what other people actually tell you. So there's not much judgment. Is one trauma bigger or worse, or does it affect you more? Because it's different for everybody. I think when it starts to affect you in daily life and it starts to restrict your work or your relationships or whatever, or the things you love doing or your friendships, then it's time to explore, maybe this is becoming an issue and I need to do something about that.
So what is, like, I'm not familiar with this at all. What is, like, intergenerational trauma?
So intergenerational trauma is when something, so when somebody is really affected by trauma, it lives in their body, but there's also a biochemical response in their trauma by adrenaline, cortisol, etc. So that means if it's a female, the egg of the daughter of that female, the daughter of the daughter, is an egg in the egg of, so it's 3 generations basically. There's a woman, then in her ovaries there's an egg, and that in that egg there's another egg in the DNA, which is basically the grandchild. So you've got grandmother, daughter, grandma, daughter. That's 3 generations.
Okay, and so that is like, when you say intergenerational trauma, you're talking about like what a excessive sort of cortisol or adrenal response to stress.
Or a very traumatic event. So I see it a lot in refugees or people who have been displaced a lot. Their nervous system is shot to pieces. They're very hypervigilant and they don't know actually what is. They never feel safe.
Yeah.
But they don't know how because they've always lived, like, for example, in Great Britain. But they know there's something wrong and they shouldn't be feeling like this, but they do.
Okay, so... And is this mainstream and like accepted by everyone, or is this...
There's more research, but it is generally accepted in science, yes.
Okay. And so it's like and is it like the epigenetic expression is affected by the stress of the original mother?
Yeah, it's basically a neurological and biochemical response, yes.
Okay. That's interesting. And so is there hope for these people in particular?
Yeah.
You can, like, what's the kind of treatment?
So I do a lot of EMDR, which uses bilateral stimulation, which is basically stimulation of the two halves of the brain. I also use a somatic approach, which is where I go, what do you feel in the body? Because trauma lives in the body too. It gets like stuck in the body. It never gets processed because it was a process that was never completed, if you so.
Okay.
So there are different therapies. Sorry, I'm really bamboozling you. So there are basically different therapy modalities that I would select for one particular individual, depending on who's sitting in front of me.
Yeah, when you say get stuck in the body, what do you mean by that?
Okay, so there is a really good book called The Body Knows the Score. It's by Bessel van der Kolk. I actually studied with him. He's a Dutchman, but he lives in Boston.
Okay.
And it's how trauma lives in the body and it's stuck in the body. So you may feel a sensation in your body, but you actually don't know where it's from. Mm-hmm. So that can actually manifest itself as unexplained pain or IBS or anything of that nature.
Okay, and what's the thinking on how does it get there? Like, how are the locations determined? Is it random?
No, there is like a list. Like back pain is a lot. There's a strong correlation between autoimmune disease like ME, MS, etc. Mm-hmm. It's not sure causation because there's not enough data to actually make a definite conclusion, but there's definitely strong correlation.
Okay. And how about, you said that a lot of the guys that come to you with problems with porn, they typically have anxiety, right?
Some people do. So I would grade people. Like some people, their life gets taken over. Like they spend 12, 13 hours a day on porn addiction. Other people only, and this is between exclamation marks, or question marks, like 7 or 8 hours. So, wow. So sometimes it's a coping mechanism, sometimes to relieve anxiety, something is running away from something.
I imagine a life where you spend at least 7 or 8 hours is going to cause a lot of anxiety itself.
Yeah, because now you have two problems. Yeah. You have anxiety and now you have a compulsion too.
Yeah. I mean, you spend 7 or 8 hours on anything, it's probably going to make life more stressful, I think.
Oh, because hugely, because it affects your work, it affects your relationship, it affects your friendships, it can affect your finances, it can affect many aspects of your life. And
this sort of, when you say only 7 or 8 hours, is this like the bottom end of what you're seeing?
Well, no, it's like a spectrum of, but these are some of the examples that I've dealt with, yes.
Yeah, and so do you feel like they started using that to cope with anxiety
or depression or stress? Yeah.
And what do you think's going on? So what do you think's going on there generally, like at a higher level, right, in either society or, you know, the way we live? You know, because that, in a way, that is a system, right, that's kind of playing out. If people have mental health issues like anxiety or depression, and they're then getting hooked on.
Yeah, it may sometimes it's just like they feel bored, or like people who travel a lot, they're alone in their hotel room. So what are you gonna do? You're bored. You've got jet lag, so you may not be able to sleep. So what do you do? A person may just watch porn, and they find it alleviates the stress and the anxiety and the boredom. But now it becomes a coping mechanism. And then they find that the coping mechanism actually starts to take over their life. Now you've got two problems instead of one.
Yeah. And you know, how would you sort of advise people on just evaluating, I think, you know, what kind of problems people have? Because I feel like, you know, with mental health and wellness, I feel like, you know, many people, or the average person, is maybe sort of illiterate in this sense, in the sense they can't really describe or evaluate what problems they have. Like, what would you say for someone who just has a general sense that they're not where they should be? Like, where would you tell people to kind of start? Right?
What do you mean by the question?
In terms of like, maybe people are feeling just unwell, like mentally unwell in some way, you know, stressed, they've got some kind of problems. How would you say they should sort of begin to evaluate themselves and identify what these problems might be? Because you have to sort of identify issues before you can start solving anything.
Yeah, well, that's the difficulty. Sometimes what you think the problem is not the problem. It's just a symptom, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So very often symptom labels are just symptoms of an issue, but the symptoms are not the issue. It's the issue that needs to be resolved, and then the symptoms will disappear. But I think when you start evaluating, are you feeling less connected with the people around you? Do you find it difficult to connect with people around you? Is it affecting work? Is it affecting your career? Is it making you feel less happy? That's a good starting point. Is it you're actually feeling less happy, less fulfilled? Does it make you feel less of a person? On a very basic level, that's the starting points, I think.
And so you have quite a range of treatments for trauma, anxiety, and other issues that when I had a look through, I didn't recognize really any of them, apart from maybe hypnotherapy. But even then, I don't really know what that entails exactly.
Okay.
So I'm quite interested, like, you know, let's say start with, you know, if you look at hypnotherapy, is that, how close to what people imagine is that process, right?
Okay.
Hypnotism.
Well, I would say 90% of people hypnotize themselves several times a day. You just don't realize it.
Okay.
So if you read a book and you're really absorbed in it, congratulations, that's self-hypnosis. You watch a movie and you suddenly jump when something scary happens, that's self-hypnosis. Have you ever do you drive?
Yeah.
Have you ever driven on a motorway and suddenly you're at your destination and you're like, I missed a bit of the journey? That's motorway hypnosis.
Okay.
When you daydream, that's self-hypnosis. So it's a natural trance. It's just a different state of brain wave frequency. That's all it is.
Okay.
Clinical hypnosis is therapy that uses a brain frequency that allows you to access the subconscious. That's all it is to resolve an issue. But the person is always in control.
Okay. So what do you think's happening when people do crazy things under hypnosis? You feel like they're deciding to do those things?
Nobody I've actually have really done crazy things in hypnosis. Sometimes surprising things happen, but nothing crazy happened. It just allows you to basically set aside that deeply analytical mind, because 90% of your actions are actually driven by your subconscious. 10% or 5% is actually driven by your conscious. So you're basically trying to resolve complex issues using 5 to 10% of your brain power.
Yeah.
While you could actually use 90 or 95% of your brain power to resolve an issue.
And so what you do, is that basically, so what you're doing is you're trying to bring much more power to specific problems in people's lives.
Hypnosis is just a brainwave frequency. It's a natural state that uses ultra focus without any distracting elements, that allows you to get a different perspective on a situation and to resolve complex issues effectively and quickly, because you use so much brain power.
That's really interesting. Do you use it in your own life, on yourself?
Yeah, I do. So when I revise something, I actually go in a different brain frequency state because I absorb more information. When I read, I often go in that. What else do I? It doesn't work on my daughter actually, because she always said, "You've got your hypnosis voice on. I'm not listening to you." But yeah, I use it to get a different brain. For ultra focus, I go that. Also for pain relief, I do that. I keep freaking out my dentist, who doesn't use any anesthetic on me.
Okay, so how do you do this then? Because I feel like people would be really interested in.
So it's like anything. The more you practice, the better you become at it. But I just count myself down.
Count yourself?
Yeah. I literally go like a visual in a spiral staircase. I'm already there.
So you're taking yourself down a spiral staircase in your mind, like.
Yes.
Yeah. You're like walking down it. You're visualizing.
So I'm a very visual person.
Yeah.
But it's basically the same process for people who meditate. They will actually recognize it. It's actually the same brain frequency.
Okay.
So that's it. It's a learned skill. But anybody can do it. Almost anybody can do it.
So are you in the first person? You're in third person? Like, I'm really curious about specifically.
I'm just me. So I just visualize it. But I've been doing it a lot. So for me, it's almost people who've been training in it, because we had to undergo it all ourselves too.
Yeah.
Normally you say every time you hear this word or you visualize this, you will go 10 times deeper, 100 times deeper, 1,000 times deeper. So it always becomes like autopilot. I can just go into it really, really quickly.
Okay, so if you're trained like you, it's basically you're almost remembering the state rather in a way.
Well, what I normally do, how I work with people, is I send them a recording to get used to my voice and to the process. But I put in, every time you hear this, you will go 10 times deeper. Which basically means every time, the next time they hear it, they will go 10 times deeper. So for people who are nervous, I just send them a recording and they listen to it. It's quite funny, the recordings I make, because I treated one person for anxiety, and their partner listened to it too, and it actually resolved his snoring. I don't know how that worked, but I think it had something to do with the breathing pattern I put into it. But he stopped snoring, and he had operations and everything.
Yes. And this is just really, I find this really bizarre, actually, as a technique. So, and this works on, do you feel like this works on anybody?
So up to 95% of people can be hypnotized to some degree. Okay. How deep you can go depends basically on you. If you don't want to go there, I can't make you go there.
Yeah.
But if you just allow the process to unfold, you can go there. If you can daydream, you can go there. If you can lose yourself in a specific moment, you can go there.
I heard that you can tell how susceptible someone is to hypnosis by the way their eyes move. If you look up and then look down, is that true?
No, what happens is if you look down like this and then you look down, it actually stimulates alpha brain waves, which is how the first basically frequency. But normally you do how suggestible somebody is, but that's more for stage hypnosis, and I don't do anything like that.
Yeah. Okay. And so you use this, what did you call hyperfocus? Was it?
Hyperfocus, yeah.
Right.
Or ultra focus, or laser beam focus,
yeah. I feel like that's something that everyone would want access to.
Yeah, because it actually can unfold different interesting things. So sometimes I ask, like, so the part of you that drives this behavior, can you please come forward? Because everybody has parts of you, like you have your part that, I don't know, detests doing the dishes, etc., or homework, and then you've got like the rebellious parts. Everybody has parts of themselves. So the difference is in clinical hypnosis or in this altered natural state is that you're very focused and you allow the critical mind or the analytical mind to step away, to stay in the background, and to allow other parts to come forward. And they may be the parts that actually drive the behavior. Now, you may have multiple parts. Sometimes there's a part that's growling at me, and they don't want to say, and I have to say, okay, I can understand you're really angry, but how old are you? And they're like, oh, I came into X's person's life when? And my role is, okay, and what's your role? Now, this I may sound really scary, but it's actually really revealing when you actually do this work, because then you can identify what drives the behavior, but you also can start to negotiate with the part.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand that you do this. And this can only take place in 30 minutes or so. Sometimes we only have to do it once, sometimes we have to do it multiple times, because some parts can be stubborn and they don't really want to say to stop.
Yeah, I've actually done this exercise myself, because a few years ago I was exploring NLP, and you have the negotiation with parts. It is a very interesting exercise to do, and you suddenly do discover there are multiple people in there.
Yeah, not multiple people, but parts of you. And you're like, oh, I didn't know this part existed, but this is it. Yeah.
And they've got their own agenda.
Exactly, it's the agenda they have.
Yeah.
And was it to either protect you or to punish you? Or you had different parts?
It was probably neither. It was more just like desires for different things, and it was almost like you have to say, okay, I'll give you what you want, but in moderation, right? And it's sort of like, can you accept that?
Yes.
That was how I was using it myself, but it's a very, very interesting exercise to go through.
It's very powerful, yeah.
I can't let the ultra focus thing go until we get to the bottom of it, because I just feel like I want to figure out, like, can I tap into this I would like to tap into this state. I'm sure like almost everyone who's listening to this podcast would want to tap into this state. So how do we go about learning that and gaining that skill, the ability that you're talking about?
Okay, well, there are several recordings available from numerous sources that can allow you to get into that state. The problem is when you're doing it yourself, you kind of need an outsider, because it's a bit weird to negotiate with yourself, and sometimes you can also be in a state that you feel really helpless, and it can be quite frightening, so I wouldn't actually recommend it. But some people, like athletes, they use hypnosis to actually visualize themselves. For example, people who want to practice their golf move, they actually visualize it. They use guided visualization, which is basically self-hypnosis, to perform better. And that's how you can improve because the autofocus, without actually doing it, just visualizing it, it allows you to focus and to train your muscles and your muscle memory, etc. So there's lots of things that can be used in different ways.
Okay. Cool. And what kind of there are some other interesting therapies and approaches that I wasn't familiar with. So I'm interested in this one called Blast, which you had on your website. Could you tell us a bit about that and like when you kind of use that?
Yeah, sure. So Blast is basically bilateral analysis stimulation technique. It's very similar to EMDR, which is eye movement desensitizing. It uses eye movement to help process specific things through both brain hemispheres, so the left and to the right.
Okay. And this is to process traumas?
It can be. It can also be to do anxiety, or I've used it for OCD, etc. It just helps things to process things. Interestingly, it's a similar state to hypnosis because you kind of go in an autofocus, altered brain state. And altered brain state sounds really kind of scary, but it's just a very natural phenomenon. We do it all the time.
Yeah. Which states are we going through on an average day?
Beta.
Most of the time?
Yeah. Delta is for sleeping.
Okay. We're mainly just switching between these two?
Yes.
And how many are there to choose from?
So you have alpha, which is like the entry level when you look up. When you look up at a certain point and then close your eyelids down, you can automatically go into alpha state.
Okay.
They have theta state too.
And the alpha is useful. Is it useful?
Alpha is useful, yeah. It's a more efficient learning state, certainly.
Okay. So if you're going to learn something, it'll be better if you look up and then you look.
Well, then you can't, but you that's like in one way to introduce it, but you can introduce it in different ways. Yeah. So what you can do is called peripheral vision, or I call it owl eyes.
Okay.
So if you look at the spot that's slightly overhead.
Yeah.
And
worried about doing it now in case it's like not the best.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So you look at the spot and then you focus on that, and then you slowly expand your vision to the side, and then you slowly expand your visions to incorporate more of the height. And then almost like an owl, you can almost see like behind you.
Yeah.
That actually clears the mind. It's also the optimum learning state.
Okay. That's cool. And how about this one called kinetic shift? When do you kind of...
So kinetic shift it uses different techniques like eye movement and guided visualization and clinical hypnotherapy. It's basically quick. I don't use it that often anymore. I certainly wouldn't use it with addiction issues.
Which ones of these do you find is most effective for porn and sex addiction?
Well, as with any addiction, I would say EMDR and clinical hypnotherapy and a bit of psychotherapy, but just normal talking therapy. But I don't really do that a lot.
Yeah.
Because I don't find it particularly effective.
Okay. So what is what is your sort of typical treatment program look like?
So it depends on the person, but normally the first session we just have like an intake, a thorough intake. What's the problem? Then I help you install inner resources. So increase your inner strength, increase your self-belief, also how to reduce your anxiety. So I give you like a toolkit at the very first session that I want you to practice, because the more you practice, the stronger it becomes, the more easy it becomes. And then in the second session, before the second session, I send a form with events that have disturbed you in some way. And then we will go that. But sometimes I just do a float back. Okay, what's the earlier event? Because it's kind of quick and dirty. Well, yeah, you get there really, really quickly.
And then?
Well, it depends. Sometimes I just drop them straight into clinical hypnosis because they're kind of in a trance, a natural trance. So I can quickly drop them into, and then at that part we can do. It depends. I like to do ego state or parts therapy if appropriate, but it really depends on that person. Sometimes we go back to a traumatic event and we just use EMDR to process it, and that makes them become unstuck.
When you say process,
when you say process, it's basically processed through both brain hemispheres, so the left and the right.
Yeah.
So the emotional part and the rational part, the logical mind and the emotional mind.
So does that mean to arrive at some kind of conclusion about an event?
So this is a bit brain geeky, but basically some traumatic events have never been time-stamped. So, you know, when you post a letter, it gets like a date stamp. With some events, they don't go time-stamped, which basically means the subconscious and your nervous system still thinks it's happening now because it never been time-stamped. Because the problem is when something traumatic happens, your prefrontal cortex and your hippocampus, they basically log out. This is too much. I can't cope with this. I'm going to log out. And because of that process, it never gets time-stamped. So it's not an event in the past. It's still a current event.
Yes.
So by actually moving it to both parts of the brain, the hippocampus gets back online in that event when it's activated. When that event is activated, it basically gets time-stamped.
Mm-hmm. And is that the main breakthrough usually?
Yeah.
Yeah. So just putting it and saying that happened 10 years ago.
Well, it's also the beliefs that you formed at that time have not been updated. It's basically like an iPhone that hasn't been updated in 10 years. Mm-hmm. So by helping process it, you update the beliefs that went with it, like the beliefs like I'm helpless, I'm weak, I'm unlovable, I'm not enough, whatever comes up.
Yeah. Cool. And like, do these techniques, do you find that like they are one-time breakthroughs, or do you need to kind of repeat many of these techniques?
So it depends, but I've never seen a person more than 12 times. And that was something like 30 years of trauma.
Yeah.
But it depends on what I said. So some people I only see once, some people I see twice, but it depends on the severity.
Yeah.
It also allows how willing you are to work on it.
Yeah.
Because I can't make you do the work. I'm there as a facilitator and a guide, but I can't make you actually do something and change. You actually have to have the will to do that yourself. So how much you buy into it and how hard you are willing to go there, that is very much dependent on the outcome.
Yes.
Or the outcome is dependent on that.
Yeah. So do you think that basically it's like what would make you successful at anything essentially has a role to play in being successful at overcoming these kind of psychological issues as well?
Yeah, some people, they come in and we both don't know they have a secondary gain. So they want to change, but there is something that says, yeah, but if I change, I have to do this. I have to go to work, or I have to connect with my family. So I do want to change, but on the other hand, I don't want to change.
Yeah.
So it's like a inner saboteur.
Yeah, I feel like that's extremely common in just everyday life, right? Like, it's what happens when you succeed at something. It's why sometimes you can have this tendency to just want to go backwards, because when you succeed at something, generally you actually it's almost like getting to the next level in the game gets harder.
Yeah, and sometimes what feels familiar feels safe.
Yeah.
So I really want a new thing, but the new thing kind of freaks me out too because it doesn't feel familiar. So I'm actually going to go back to the old thing because that feels familiar, but it feels safe too.
I feel in business and entrepreneurship, I feel like that's happened a few times personally, because I worked freelance or as a poker player, which are very individualistic pursuits, right? And then not with REMOJO, but with previous companies or business ideas, there's this tension where it's like, if this works and you succeed, then you're going to move up a level. Things are going to get much more difficult. And obviously you haven't played that level before, so you don't actually have the skills yet. That creates like this temptation to just like slow things down.
Yeah, imposter syndrome, procrastination, etc. kicks in. Yeah.
You want to slow everything down and control everything. I feel like that is something that holds a lot of people back in their life, is this resistance, because they realize that when they make a breakthrough, it's going to be better, but also more difficult in a way.
Yeah, so humans are not logical human beings. They really are not. We like to think we are, but we're really not logical or rational, because 90% of your behavior is driven by the subconscious. So some people really want to achieve an objective, but sometimes they make themselves fail to fail. So, for example, if I achieve this goal, that means I will be really happy. But I secretly don't think I can change that goal, so I'm going to sabotage myself so I can't fail at what I really want to achieve. That doesn't sound logical, and it is not logical, but that is what happens.
Yeah. And how do you think that have you got any sort of specific techniques that you use to help people like break out of that mentality in your therapy, or maybe in life as well?
Yeah, so it depends. Hypnosis is interesting. It helps. It's very effective. I normally send people home with a recording that they have to listen to for 21 days, because it takes 21 days to break a habit to form new neural pathways. So that's one way. Also, just visualizing how you will feel in that moment when you achieved your goal. Will you be happier? How will other people see you, etc.? That can be a strong motivational drive. Also, building resources like inner strength, or competitiveness. Sometimes you just have to unleash, you kind of have to unlock a drive, or you can unlock something, a moment that they were really good at, a moment that they really achieved something and they were really proud, and you can basically tap into that to use that in the future to make that same sense of achievement and use that drive.
I'm curious about building competitiveness. Is this something you help people do?
I frequently help people to be more competitive, yes.
Okay.
And very interestingly, sometimes most of the time they are very competitive in one area of their life, but it's kind of transferring that competitiveness in that area of their life to another area of their life. You just have to tap in and transfer it.
Tap in by sort of putting yourself mentally in that same...
It's like unlocking it. You just transfer it. That's a metaphorical, not like physical. Yeah.
Cool. And what do you think are like... I know that you're sort of aware of maybe more plugged into the kind of research. What research do you find interesting? What do you think is like coming in the future in terms of either treatments or understandings, right, in the realm of neuroscience or any of the therapeutic treatments?
So we're getting a lot more knowledge about what actually happens in the brain with addictions, which is the reward center. So that's very interesting because we actually understand what are the driving parts and what parts of the brain are involved with that, which really helps to fine-tune treatment plans. There are also more technologies coming out all the time where we actually can basically see brain activity at the spot that we can use in the treatment room. So we can see, okay, what brain area is activated right now, and you can teach people to actually alter that brain, whatever goes on, like hypervigilant or really agitated. And you can teach a person to do that. And they can see the results at the time because you can see on the screen what goes on in your brain.
Yeah, so because you get the instant feedback.
You get it's called biofeedback. You basically get instant feedback what goes on in your brain and what actually helps to change that.
Yeah, I feel like that will become the future of meditation, right? Certainly in the Western world, I think when these things become more commonplace, even though it's somewhat missing the point in a way. I feel like there will be a significant proportion of the meditation space that orients around these like real-time feedback and aligning your mind around the feedback that you're getting to try and get a certain state.
Yeah, and some people need that feedback to understand what they're doing.
Yeah.
But they also get like in almost like gratification, what they're doing is working. So it gives them the motivation to do more rather than they have to wait to see if it works.
Yeah. Okay. And how would you like people to find you, get in touch, learn more about your work and the sort of treatments that you offer?
So there's several ways. So they can either find me on LinkedIn, and you can follow me. You don't have to connect with me. You can just follow me, and nobody will actually know that you're actually following me, but you will get all my latest updates. Okay. Or you can go to my website, greymatterstherapy.com.
Okay, if they want to follow you on LinkedIn, it's Venka, Venka, de Rooij, so DEROOIJ.
Yes.
For people, because they might struggle to guess
yes
what to search. But yeah, well, thanks so much for being on the podcast, and hopefully that gave people plenty to think about, and I think Google and learn more about in depth, especially ultra focus. I'm going to be
laser beam focus. Ultra focus.
I'm going to be searching for that for sure. So Venka de Rooij, thank you very much.
No problem. enjoy being there. Here.